The elite do not want you to own precious metals. Well, actually, let me clarify that statement. The elite hate what widespread ownership of precious metals means to their way of life and the amount of power that they can hold onto. It's not necessarily the ownership of silver and gold in and of itself that they're against, but what that ownership entails. Individual owners of silver and gold generally buy the metals today in order to hedge against the destruction of fiat currency. I mean, some buy it as an investment because they see it as undervalued, and it is undervalued, don't get me wrong. Of course, that won't always be the case. It hasn't always been the case, but it has always been the case that silver and gold are a protection, a hedge against the eventual demise of every fiat currency that has ever existed. Owners of physical precious metals have a deeper consciousness of the reality behind not only the nature of the currencies of the world, but also the destructive nature of out-of-control debt, out-of-control money creation, the illusion of wealth that is created by so many of today's paper assets, such as bonds and bank accounts, IRAs and 401ks, pensions, derivatives, many of today's overvalued stocks. We see the game that they are playing, or at least we have a glimpse of it. And they don't like that. The elite prefer to stay in the shadows, to work behind the scenes and shift blame on various puppets that they put in place. The elite even hate it when governments that are outside of their sphere of control threaten their dominance of the world. I mean, some people have theorized that Libya, which was led by Muammar Gaddafi back in 2011, was preparing to start their own gold and possibly silver-backed currency prior to the Arab Spring Civil War that led to the eventual overthrow of the existing government, the killing of Muammar Gaddafi, and the country's descent into chaos, a state of chaos that still remains to this day. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Gaddafi was a good guy by any means. I don't think he was. But I do think that the powers that be were more than happy to pull some strings and ensure that the media and NATO leaders would be beating the drums of war prior to the eventual NATO intervention, which essentially helped the rebellion out. And I'm sure oil interests likely played a role as well. But the point is that the elite seek total control, and ownership of silver and gold takes away a certain level of control and power from them. Individual citizens or even nations can claim back a level of freedom, of independence, of sovereignty. The elite recognize the value of precious metals. I'm sure that many of the world's elite own silver and gold. And I'm not just talking about the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers, but even I'm talking about people like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg. These individuals are not foolish. They're not dumb. But they seek more than just precious metals. I mean, they can attain a certain level of power from that, but because they would never be too open about their affinity and their ownership of precious metals, it limits the utility of silver and gold for them, at least for the time being in this current paradigm. I think the elite would much rather focus their efforts on owning corporations, owning vast swaths of land, of skyscrapers. They seek total control of the markets, including stocks and commodities and bonds and currencies. And ultimately, they'd prefer to have a say in what governments and central banks do and what they don't do so that they can benefit from those decisions. How does individual precious metal ownership, though, subtract from that power? First of all, understand that the current system is built on the back of fiat currency and debt. The two go hand in hand, though maybe you could throw fractional reserve banking in there as well. But these things go hand in hand, and they enable so many things that the elite use to consolidate wealth and consolidate power. Take the U.S. government, for example. The U.S. government has the strongest military in the world at this point in time. I don't think anybody would dispute that. The U.S. government has some of the lowest rates of things like poverty. I mean, true poverty. We have some of the highest literacy rates. We have an extensive safety net, or maybe you would just call it the welfare system. We have an incredible infrastructure system. Even though it is crumbling, it is pretty impressive when you consider the expansiveness of the U.S. compared to smaller European countries, which might have, bridge by bridge, road by road, might have a better infrastructure system. We have all these things. All of the amenities of living in modern day America, all of that is built on debt. It's not sustainable. Would any of that be possible without a fiat currency? I think so, yes. But would the transfer of wealth that has occurred through the ages and continues today be possible without a fiat currency? No, fiat currency and its inevitable destruction, inflation, leads to greater and greater wealth disparities. I mean, just take a look at the stock market since quantitative easing and low interest rates began. It's been going up and up, just like the real estate market, especially upscale real estate market, has continued to rise since the Great Recession. The bond market bubble has been essentially extended another 8 years since quantitative easing began. Even if we look at art prices, really expensive paintings, etc., sculptures, even those prices have been way up. And who benefits from all of this loose monetary policy that would only be possible with a fiat currency? I'll tell you this much. It's not the working class. It's not most of the middle class that benefit from this. They're dealing with rising housing prices and taxes on their houses, on their property, which are the result of this loose money. And they're also dealing with ever-rising healthcare costs, especially the middle class. And these hikes in healthcare premiums are, again, due to a healthcare system that is funded by an enormous amount of federal debt that also would not be possible without a fiat monetary system. I think that you'll come to find that many of our problems can be traced back to this system. And don't get me wrong, I mean, at some point, individuals, you and I, we have to take some level of responsibility. We cannot and should not blame all of our individual issues on central banks, on big governments, on fiat money, etc. In fact, I think that's dangerous. I think not taking some level of personal responsibility makes us no better than those that are advocating for so-called free speech zones, those that claim that they have the right to not be offended, those that claim the government should forgive their student loans because they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. You know that type that I'm talking about. We should not mirror them in any way. We should take some level of personal responsibility. And I think most of my viewers get that, the idea of individual responsibility. But as I was saying, this loose monetary policy hurts the poor and the middle class, but helps the rich and the wealthy. And so the wealth disparity grows. And some take the wrong approach. Again, on that side of the political spectrum on the left, because they're making the wrong diagnosis of this problem, the cause, the root of this issue. Some people on the left say that we should just seek to redistribute wealth, that we should, they advocate for higher taxes for the rich, more free stuff for the poor, and that somehow we should even this out. But I don't think that more government is the solution, especially since these very elite are the ones that control the policy in the first place. I mean, consider the idea that Congress made themselves exempt to the laws of Obamacare. It's a perfect example of this two-class system in which there are the uber powerful and everyone else. I mean, on one hand, I think we live in a fallen world that will never be perfect. Okay, humans are not going to solve some of our own problems. But with that being said, I think some of these issues just would not exist if we had a sound monetary system. Another good example of how this fiat money system, I was talking about the U.S. government, let's talk about the U.S. military industrial complex. A lot of that is funded by debt and in turn fiat currency. The power of today's military would not be what it is without our current monetary system. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think a powerful military would be possible if we had some sort of gold standard or something. But what we have today is a military that's largely funded by debt. Okay, it's a product of our monetary system, and just think of the different things that the military industrial complex has done around the world that have essentially, I mean, Libya is a great example. We can talk about Syria, we can talk about Iraq, Afghanistan, various wars that we've attempted to start in places like Iran, things we've done in Vietnam, all these different, Central and South America, all these different places that the U.S. military has gone, oftentimes with some other interest in mind. I mean, that interest might be the military-industrial complex itself, right? People want to make money off of selling bullets and bombs and fighter jets and tanks and whatever. That's an industry in and of itself. But there's also oil interests that have come into play, especially when we're talking about the Middle East. We can talk about illegal drugs like opiates when we're talking about Afghanistan. All these different things come into play. And I mean, again, it's a military, it's a system that's fueled by fiat currency and debt. And look at all of the evil that it has spread, all the pain, the hunger, the suffering that it has spread throughout the world. So I'll say it again. The elite do not want you to own precious metals. With every physical ounce of silver or gold that you buy, you claim back a level of freedom and independence. You might not realize it, but you're part of a revolution. Only it's not a revolution that's being fought with muskets like in 1776, or maybe it'd be AR-15s today. I'll let somebody else broach that topic of revolting against our government here in 2017. But what I'm talking about is a monetary revolution. By choosing silver and gold, you're becoming your own banker. You're taking back a small amount of power from the elite. Unfortunately, as it stands here in middle part of 2017, silver and gold owners are still the small minority of the general population, or at least in the United States and most Western nations. In India, actually, some 66% of household savings are either in real estate or gold. And that's a fact that the Indian government despises. I mean, they say that it hurts the economy, that's slowing down the economy, that saving accounts or investments could help, essentially finance more growth. But I think it's more likely that the government wants more control over the populace and the monetary system, as evidenced by their demonetization of a large amount of, their larger bills of their rupees back in the end of 2016. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have Kazakhstan. Actually, recently, this was this past winter, the Kazakhstani central bank encouraged each citizen to try and save. Their goal was 100 grams of gold each, rather than holding their wealth in cattle, which might be a more traditional form for a lot of those people. But in the U.S., just a small amount of people actually own silver and gold in a form other than jewelry or in some sort of electronic or somewhere else in their, in their car or in their house. I'm talking ownership of bars and coins. It's tiny compared to how much is invested in stocks, bonds, real estate, how much is held in IRAs, 401ks, other retirement funds. That fact, I think, will change as the dollar is further destroyed. However, I think for a lot of people, I'm talking even some of your loved ones, think if you have parents that are on the verge of retiring, I think this realization will come far too late. I think it'll prevent them from significantly protecting themselves. I mean, don't get me wrong, silver and gold stackers make up a significant part of global physical demand. And in the case of silver, I think this demand has led the market closer and closer to a physical shortage. I've talked about this time and time again in my videos. However, I think silver and gold ownership needs to go mainstream. Like I said, some will come to the realization on their own, but in the meantime, it's up to us to advocate for precious metal ownership, especially right now, considering how cheap it is. It's not too difficult to talk to family members or close friends about it if you feel they would be receptive to the idea, and they don't need to go all in either. I mean, any amount of silver and gold, I believe, will serve to protect them. This is a monetary revolution. The elite, like I said, do not want you to own precious metals. They don't want you to even know about the wisdom in owning silver and gold. Individually, I won't make a difference. You won't make a difference unless, you're one of the Hunt brothers. But together, a mass of hundreds of thousands or even millions of individuals, of stackers, we can take back a small amount of power, fight the elite and central banks, and essentially become our own decentral banks. Thank you for watching.